We're back to talk about Lee Morgan's Infinity. So this is Blue Note's Tone Poet release that came out just last Friday. So we're about a week after the release, and I'm just getting around to make this video. Sometimes I don't want to make a video the day that it comes out or the day after because it takes a little bit for me to process my thoughts, and guess what? Same thing happened here this time. So before we dive into what those thoughts are, as well as some of the history behind this album, go ahead, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow me on Instagram at what_can_brown. All right, so let's dive in. A couple of things about this release. It was cut from the original master tapes. It was mastered by Kevin Gray at Coherent Audio, supervised by Joe Harley, who is supervising this entire release schedule, the entire series. 180 gram, it's gatefold. It's very nice. These things are always done very well, and this one is no exception. If you open this thing up, you will see. Well, I store the record in between to kind of protect it, but you'll see some lovely photos here of Lee Morgan and crew. And again, just as usual, this is a very nice addition. So about this release, because this is an interesting one, I actually, before this was slated for Tone Poet, I'd say it's one of the Lee Morgan sessions that I knew the least about. And one of the reasons why is because it just hasn't gotten that many reissues. And in fact, you could argue, well, so because this was a shelved session, it was not, despite the fact it was recorded in 1965, it was not released in 1965. In fact, the first time that anybody got to hear it was in 1981. And this is actually the first vinyl reissue since 1981. Okay, so it just hasn't really seen the light of day too many times. All right, so I kind of wanted to put this recording in sequence, if you will, in Lee Morgan's discography. So as I mentioned, recorded in 1965, actually November. And this was 2 months after Lee Morgan recorded Jackknife, which was Jackie McLean's album, which was also shelved and reissued later. And then I guess before that, the session that would have been Lee's, so Lee Morgan's last session before this one that was his own as a leader, was Cornbread, right? So everybody knows Cornbread. I actually think that's the Tone Poet release. I think it might have. So then on the other side, in terms of what came after this, was another Jackie McLean album, and that was Consequence, which was also shelved. Then it was Hank Mobley's Caddy for Daddy. Morgan wouldn't have another release of his own until Delightfully the following year. So where that places, if you're following me, where that places this album in terms of Lee Morgan's chronology is in between the sessions for Cornbread and Delightfully. So this title hasn't always had this cover. This cover was actually designed more or less, I think they made some adjustments, for the CD release. But the original release, like I said, was in 1981 in the LT series, and every title in the LT series had an atrocious cover, and this one was no exception. So that was 1981, and then, like I said, there was a CD release, I think in 1998, both in the US and Japan, and then there's a few other CD releases, not another vinyl release, until this one right here. So there's really only been 2 ways you can hear this on vinyl, and I just never managed to pick up the original LT series. So that's kind of why I was approaching this recording a little bit fresh. So let's talk a little bit about maybe why it hasn't gotten more attention in the past. Because I think that there's sort of speculation, certainly when sessions are shelved, people wonder why, right? Why was it shelved? Why did they not think that it could have been released, even with a little bit of a delay, as so many albums were, including those aforementioned Jackie McLean albums. Now, it's likely that this was recorded just the year after Lee Morgan sort of famously burned his head on a radiator, which was during, possibly the peak of his problem with narcotics. And we kind of actually can slot this exactly because there are session photos from 1964 associated with Wayne Shorter's Night Dreamer. So if you look that session, if you look up those session photos, what you'll find is a picture of him next to Wayne Shorter as well as Elvin Jones, and you'll see a bandage on his head. And again, that session was from April of the prior year. This one was, again, the following year. So that doesn't necessarily explain why this might be shelved, because actually Lee sounds quite good here. There's not necessarily evidence that he was struggling, and I don't think generally that there is on many albums, if any. One thing that was clear though was that Lee Morgan was having a hard time getting albums released in any amount of time. So put this in perspective. I've talked about this before, and many others have before me. The Sidewinder was such a massive hit for Blue Note. It was their biggest hit to date, and that was recorded in. I'm not going to say years necessarily. I'm more interested in how long it took for them between recording date and when it actually hit the street. And there could be a variety of reasons, but one thing is it's pretty common that Lee Morgan's took an extraordinary long amount of time to be released. So Sidewinder, which was very successful, was recorded in December, and it took 7 months for it to be released, hit the street. Search for the New Land was recorded next, and it took 1.5 years. And a lot of the conversation has been that Blue Note was looking for another commercial album because they wanted to make money, and Sidewinder did really well. Why follow it up with a release that they thought maybe was a little bit more of a auteur piece or something that was too artistic? They wanted something that was going to be a little bit more commercial. So it took 1.5 years for Search for the New Land to come out. Well, Tomcat was the next session. That was shelved until the 80s. Then Rump Roller, which took 9 months, but remember, Rump Roller was much more in the vein of Sidewinder. The next session was The Gigolo, which took 3 years to get released. Then Cornbread, which was 1.5 years. Then Infinity, which was shelved. Obviously it was shelved until the 80s. Delightfully took 1.5 years. Charisma took almost 3 years. Raja was shelved, and we saw that in Tone Poet, last year. Sonic Boom was shelved. Would love to see that in Tone Poet. Procrastinator was shelved, which came next. The Sixth Sense took 2 years. And then the next one was Taru, which was shelved as well. So this was a period of like 3 or 4 years where there was an inordinate amount of both shelved sessions as well as sessions that just took a long time to get put out. And I think the bottom line is that Sidewinder really changed the game for Blue Note in terms of what they were prioritizing and what they wanted to achieve with releases. And it's clear, especially with the sale to Liberty, that they weren't shy about putting in the money to record a session and then simply shelving it and not worrying about it again. So it's kind of interesting to have all of this happening around this time for Lee Morgan, and all because he had a really successful album. All right, so back to the topic at hand, right? Infinity. So the lineup here includes, Lee Morgan, but he's joined by Jackie McLean, Larry Willis, Reggie Workman, and Billy Higgins. So this and Jackie McLean's Right Now are the first 2 appearances by Willis on Blue Note, and actually among his first handful of sessions that he ever recorded. So anyway, young musician, but obviously you can't, not obviously, but I'll say you can't necessarily tell that here. His playing is excellent. So let me kind of talk you through some of the tracks. I'm actually not going to do a comparison because I don't have that LT series. So I thought I'd just give you some of my thoughts about this album, whether it's worthwhile. So the first piece is the title track, Infinity, and it is long. It's almost 12 minutes. It's like 11 minutes and 40 seconds or something. What I will say about this piece is that in its length, there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of solos, and those solos are extended. And I will say that they're extended so much that they aren't necessarily as thoughtful, perhaps, as on some punchier, say, hard bop tunes that maybe you're familiar with Lee Morgan having performed. So it does kind of require you to sit with it a little bit. Obviously, the playing is still great, but how it kind of manifests, honestly, for me, is that Lee Morgan has a lot of ideas that he kind of experiments with a little bit, but then kind of goes away from or abandons and doesn't really develop. He also has a lot of flubs or notes that don't quite hit, especially in the upper register. He spends a lot of time in the upper register on this tune, and it just doesn't always sound great. Now, here's the thing. Lee Morgan was not a trumpeter who was known for playing pretty all the time. I would say that somebody like Freddie Hubbard perhaps cared a little bit more about that. Lee Morgan was fine having a little bit of edge or a little bit of bite to his tone, but I will say on this album, I think it is much more prevalent that you hear some of that bite. And it isn't necessarily always the best, but at the same time, listen, we all know that this is a shelf session. We all want Lee Morgan in any form we can, or at least most of us. So I think of some of these, say, imperfections. I mean, no recording's perfect, but some of these imperfections that actually sometimes add enjoyment to a track, I think here also have a little bit of a few areas where they detract from the track. So the next track is called Miss Nettie B. This is another long one. So if the first track is almost 12 minutes, this one's 9 minutes and change. But the difference here, well, there are some differences, especially in terms of the sort of the mood or the theme that is established. So I think that there's a really nice mood here set by Reggie Workman's bass up front, the very beginning of the track. It's very late 60s sound as well. And very much a toe tapper, at least as it starts. There's definitely a hard edge to the melody. So the melody is doubled by McLean and Morgan, and it isn't necessarily entirely pleasing of a sound. There's almost like this rawness to it, to what is otherwise kind of a relaxing song. And I think it's just because of that hard sort of tone or attack that they both have with their horns. And so when you layer them, it isn't quite atonal, but it's not far from it. It's almost like it's just I don't know. It's a very interesting kind of sound. And here's the thing: it probably was intentional. It just kind of adds a little bit of a different element to the song, which is kind of interesting. I'll say this: if in the first track I was talking a little bit about Morgan's tone, maybe it was a little bit too harsh when he's playing by himself and during solos. I don't think that there's any evidence of that here. I actually think it sounds, there's a lot more clarity with his playing. He has sharp attacks, very, very exact with his playing. There is a little bit of laser tone, which is sometimes what we call like overblowing a horn in it. So I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit back and forth because there's elements where he's just so precise and so exact. And then there's others where he's adding just even more of that rawness. And again, could be intentional, but it's just a characteristic of the piece. Here, McLean's solo sounds good, and in fact, really, really good. So the order here is that Lee Morgan plays kind of an extended solo and McLean follows. And I actually think McLean in some ways sort of exceeds or does a little bit better of a job in terms of expressing ideas in the time allotted. But I actually really like Miss Nettie B. I like it better than the title track. But again, pretty bold to have these two really long tracks take up all of side one. All right, so the next track I want to talk about is called Portrait of Doll. Now, this one is notably slower than anything on side one, and I will say that it kind of has like a pensive, almost post-bop feel, at least in terms of how ballads go. Now, as this track progresses, it starts off slow, but then it does pick up in rhythm. And one of the things that I started thinking about here that I actually think is relevant across the entire album is the complexity of rhythm. And I'm not necessarily talking about the rhythm section's rhythm, but I'm talking about the rhythm in the melody that is played often by Lee Morgan or with the two with Morgan and McLean doubling the rhythm. So there's a lot of almost like syncopation playing off the beat. When you listen to it, yeah, you can tap your foot, but the melodies are complex enough that you're not going to be able to walk away from, I think, any of these tracks whistling the melody, at least not accurately, because there is that level of complexity in terms of how the lines were written. And so it's interesting that it came up here and it felt like it was more prominent. But again, I think the point is that there's nothing here that suggests that Lee Morgan was pandering for a radio hit. And I think that might be the reason why this was shelved. So similar to how some of those other albums took so long to get released because Blue Note was after radio hits, I don't think they had one here. It's certainly not with two, borderline 10-minute tracks on the first side, and then the melodies being so complex that you can't necessarily like tap your foot to or hum the tune. And so therefore they're not as memorable from a melodic standpoint. And so it's seeming, I feel like I'm kind of coalescing that around that idea. That's the reason why this one hasn't been reissued as often. Now, for those of us who love Lee Morgan, we're not going to care, and we want to hear all of these sessions, and I do think that this session is worthwhile. You just kind of have to know that it's a little bit more of that exploratory, slightly more complex kind of music, rather than what you might hear on Sidewinder, on on maybe Cornbread, Rump Roller, certainly, right? So that's kind of the difference. So moving on, with just one other track that I want to talk about. I'm skipping over one. We're going to move on to the track Zip Code. So this is the final track, and I will say that if there's any tune on this album that leans a little bit more into a blues kind of vibe, it is this one. But it still incorporates some kind of tricky rhythms in the melody line. This is another one that you're not going to be whistling. And even though it leans a little bit more into the blues, it's not like strict blues chord progression. I would say that this track as well, like the first track, the title track, may have Morgan playing at a little bit too high register. And I hesitate to say that because I know Lee Morgan can play at high registers. What I'm getting at, though, is that I know that he likes to incorporate a harshness of tone to his playing, and it works very well in terms of how that sort of hard bop thing was established. However, even within the context of how Lee Morgan normally plays, I think there's a few too many moments where he has flub notes and there's too much air pushing through his horn without sound. So it's not as clean as he often plays. And again, that's not necessarily a problem. That's how these tracks were executed, and that could have been partially by design. But I just thought it was noteworthy that he plays harsher than usual. All right, so I'm going to kind of sum up this album really, really briefly, restate a couple of points, and kind of give you just the high level of what I think about it. So firstly, I'm really excited that Blue Note chose to release this album. I think that over time it would be great if they attacked really every session in the LT series that Lee Morgan recorded and was later shelved. And I'm trying to think if there's others that weren't in the LT series, because I know that there's a few more that they haven't done that we may be able to look forward to. Sonic Boom is one, right, that I think a lot of people are thinking about. But anyway, there's other sessions out there, and based on the amount of energy that I know a lot of people have for Lee Morgan, my guess is that we're going to be treated to those at least at some point in the future. But like I said, I'm not disappointed at all that they chose to release Infinity. I think it's a fascinating sort of window into a particular period of time of Lee Morgan's when a lot of his sessions were getting pushed. And so when you hear his albums in chronology, it's not really even in chronology because they really picked and choosed and slotted things in and shelved others. And so it's kind of complex to get a sense of what that chronology is. And that's why I spent a little bit more time up front talking about it. So like I said, there's not as many catchy tunes here, sometimes due to the complexity of them, and sometimes due to the fact that simply on this album, the group was not prioritizing those sort of catchy blues forward pieces. I said that Lee Morgan's tone wasn't as good, I think, as it could be, but his playing is still super inspired. Jackie McLean's as well. Larry Willis has some really nice piano solos here, and he sounds great. And overall, I just think that the sonic presentation of this album is fantastic as well. Never owned that LT series, but I have heard some feedback from some that said that it wasn't as good as it could have been. So I'd be interested if anybody out there has both and has some thoughts on how they compare. So I think that's kind of it about this album. I hope it was helpful or enjoyable. And thanks very much. I'll see you next time.